Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Okay, so today the topic is shadow media for this video. This is the 9th video of the story spiral lecture series. I think there won't be a 10th, I'm not sure, because this kind of sums up my whole PhD research, my theory, the media theory I'm trying to propose in my PhD research, which is the culmination of the past 6 years, but also the past 10 years of my life, in a sense, in from a research sense, into the things that I went into. So I'm going to try to break it down using these four subtitles or subpoints to kind of come up with a conclusion that can maybe tie loose ends, because throughout this lecture series, because I know that there are scattered ideas, trying to bring them all together here. So first things first, I adopted this term, the shadow, as we all know, because of Carl Jung and his theory of the shadow, as the repressed parts of our psyche. If this is the self, there is a persona that we project to the world, and there is a shadow, in very simple terms, that we keep hidden from the world. So we show the world this side, which is more connected to our maybe higher self, or what we want to project ourselves to be. And there is the shadow, which is the projection of our lower self. According to Jung, we can never be a completely actualized self. I'm putting this very simply, before we integrate the shadow, meaning that we illuminate certain parts of our darkest aspects and try to integrate them into our personalities. Okay? So this theory can be debunked very easily and has been debunked easily, but somehow it speaks to an aspect of humanity that seems to be on the rise, or has been on the rise for the past maybe 200 years, which is an image of the human, if I might say, that is drawn towards the shadow somehow, or an aspect of the human that is not afraid to let out this shadow when it's most convenient, which could be, you can argue, a result of Jung's teachings. But I'm trying to take the aspect where we acknowledge and we try to integrate the dark aspects of the psyche. And again, this goes back to the 4 stages of the alchemical process. The shadow obviously has to do with the black and the white. So it's the process where either you choose to go down the portal. That's what I always used to say, like it's a not only me, like this is what many scholars on this topic see the descent into the black, the negredo, the first step, as like a willing descent. Jung also advocates for a willing descent into the darkness in order to create integration. But in many cases, in most cases, this descent is induced by an outside factor, okay? Which is where I bring the red in. I see the red like a strike always, like this twist, sudden change of events, a bomb, a missile. You never know. So sometimes things in life induce us to go down to the shadow. And the difficulty is whether you remain there or you try to leave there. And that's basically the work. All the work is there, according to Jung. So I'm just taking this term of the shadow from Jung and how he used it and trying to apply it to media. So one of the first readings or research that got me into this, or illuminated it further for me, was a concept by Eugene Thacker, media theorist in his own right, who spoke of dark media. Also, I'm summarizing and trying to explain this simplistically, but for him, dark media, a best example of it is in a film like The Ring. Remember The Ring? They watch a video on the TV, and because of the video, this entity comes out and stuff. So this video, this tape, for Eugene Thacker, is kind of representative of what he thinks is dark media, in a sense. So it's this object of digital media that kind of links two worlds, okay? So again, the analogy, we have a screen, someone is sitting in front of the screen, this is from the top, watching, so there's the, okay, but behind this is what? That's the main question. So for Thacker, dark media can be understood as media devices or media content that kind of links the material with the astral, the divine, the horrific, the sublime. Okay, and he uses many different examples, mainly from films, where this idea of dark media comes to light through these objects, like the tape here, like, trying to think of another example. He talks about the film Cairo, Pulse, which is a beautiful Japanese film, where also there is a ghost in the machine. The computer linked to the internet becomes a portal for entities to kind of invade the material world. So that, in a sense, is the idea of dark media by Thacker. Another idea that contributed to shadow media greatly is Brian Fuller's concept of, Brian Fuller, also media theorist, and others, there's other writers with him who authored a paper called Evil Media. Very different than Thacker in a sense that here the writers deal with media protocol or internet protocol, meaning the functions that lie deep in the depths of media that decide what stuff are seen, what stuff are hidden, what stuff are prioritized, what stuff are deemed safe, what is deemed dangerous. So there's a whole protocol, there's a whole side of media and the internet that the ordinary user has no idea about. You know, again, we have a phone which has a screen, we see stuff on the screen, but we have no idea what happens outside of this, you know. So there's a big speculation in this. And this is what they call evil media, in a sense that this media is taking decisions on your behalf, but you have no idea because who's in charge of this, right? Let's draw it in blue. Who runs this? Who decides? Okay, so all these questions contribute to again, I'm overly simplifying. I'll put links to the papers if anyone wants to read. But the idea is that the authors are trying to argue for the existence of layers of networks, protocol, decision-making that the ordinary user is not familiar with, as simple as that. And maybe this is because this type of thinking between Thacker and Jung and Fuller, for me, kind of draws this very abstract image of a web that exists in the shadows. It's unseen, okay? A network where there are many nodes, many things connected, many pieces of data connected together by a network. And these networks, these nodes, I'm drawing it roughly, there could be many ones in different colors also, you know. So these nodes, all of these nodes are either users or people who are propagating certain content or makers. So it's a whole kind of network of people, places, things, money, interests, all of these things that are connected somehow together and to you as one of the nodes in this network. This all has to do with stuff related to algorithmic bias, censorship, echo chambers. Echo chambers is when the same kind of content is just being shared among the same network or same group, not creating the reach that it's intended to create. This happens a lot when dealing with political content, obviously in media, algorithmic bias also. So we saw these throughout the years through practice, you know. When Sheikh Jarrah happened mainly, for me, it was a big eye-opener on these things. We started seeing drops in reaches. We started seeing seeing our content being hushed down somehow, okay? But what emerges from this is something called transmedia or transmedia storytelling, which is basically how to tell a story, transmedia, how to tell a story through different platforms of media. So when we think this, we think of the obvious franchise transmedia things like Lord of the Rings, lot like Marvel Studios, many other Star Wars. But transmedia creates a world. More specifically, it creates a story world. Okay? And through this story world, which exists on several different platforms, media platforms, you can tell one story in different ways. Again, try to link this to Kisho Tenketsu, the four phases, how the ketsu, the harmony, always opens to something else. How also that story structure helps a lot in building a world rather than one finite story with a very clear ending. So as you can see, transmedia is part of this networked society. But again, transmedia is always seen as something, again, it's like linked to franchise somehow. I've been teaching transmedia for master's film students for the past 3 years. And it always seems like too much because of the franchise quality of transmedia. But if you think about it, you and your most like when you open the send on Instagram, for example, the most recent people you send to, when you're scrolling, you see other people's likes now and reposts. This is kind of a network that can be a story world in some sense. So let's say you vibe, like you have this network that you're talking always about Palestine or stuff related to the resistance and stuff. You are creating your own story world in a sense. Now, how so if these story worlds are, I don't want to say manufactured, but kind of collectively worked on, like to create a narrative that is not linear, on the contrary, that spirals out in many places, but with a bit more control. I don't mean control, I mean maybe coordination. Okay, so what if this exists with a bit more coordination, there's the word nation also, I just realized. But so what if there's more coordination between these people so that these nodes are connected more with purpose, in a sense? Okay, so this is just theorizing. And what would happen? Okay, enter our favorite Laura Marx, who we spoke about before, and the theory of unfoldment. Where again she tries to create this, where she takes Islamic art and the functionings or the how Islamic art is made to try to explain a phenomena in new media. And I don't know if you remember in one of the videos, we tried to show it as like this downward, I tried to show it as this downward facing triangle, where Laura says that in Islamic art, there's an interplay between three elements, which is the element of God, scripture, until we eventually have the artwork. Okay? And she parallels this in media theory to be, instead of God, you have the infinite. Infinite meaning this plane of infinite visual possibility. Algorithmic art, patterns, fractals. Instead of script, you have code, the thing that allows the image to generate until infinity, and the artwork, there's the image. In both cases, there's the image. You can call it artwork or image. I'm trying to use the same logic using transmedia storytelling to kind of substitute, instead of God, you have the world, which is infinite. I don't want to write it in blue. Sorry. So instead of, not instead of, but the God can be understood as the world where your story takes place, which is infinite, which is kind of the network that I drew before. Instead of code, you have a structure to use. to craft your stories, and instead of the image, you will get the story in the end. So I'm trying to see it functioning in kind of the same way. And this dynamic, this function of story in the new media world, and specifically new media art, you know, this kind of functioning in new media art or transmedia storytelling, art or storytelling, this is what I'm kind of loosely calling for the time being shadow media, because all of this theory that we're speaking about is kind of very shadowed at the same time. Like you don't have access to this type of information, or at least I haven't seen access. I've been researching these concepts, and there are a lot of concepts. I'm trying to put them together in a way that kind of makes sense to the layman. I know this doesn't make sense to the layman, but I'm trying to reach a point where it can. Okay, so that's why I'm trying to hash out these ideas here so people can look at them, engage with them, give ideas. I don't know, make more videos, to collaborate, to coordinate, to create a kind of network of action with intent, in a sense. Okay, so this is the theory. Now let's talk about its alchemical applications. And maybe this is going to be the most difficult part to explain. So let's try. Okay, so in esoteric practice, there is a concept called the egregore. And this naming is specific, but it can have many different names. Hive mind is one of them. Have you seen the show Pluribus? It's all about this somehow. So it could be a hive mind or a collective mind. So it's basically this unseen entity. You don't see the egregore, okay? It's unseen. But it's kind of an entity that engulfs the world and begins to give you what you want, to put it simply, because this egregore cannot exist without being fed by many people. That's why it's a collective mind, okay? Who practice similar rituals, who have a similar goal, part of the same ideology. I don't know, you can call it whatever you want, but each one of them, if they're connected through a certain purpose or scheme or belief, they can start contributing to create this egregore, and in return, this egregore gives them what they want back. So it's something to do with manifestation, but on a collective level, I guess. You know, there's this story that I heard the other day from a friend, an old story from the South Lebanon, where a small, very tiny group of resistance fighters were trapped behind a bush, and in front of them was an Israeli group of soldiers, way outnumbered, way overpowered. I think it was two brothers in the story. I don't know, but the story has been told a lot, as I heard. So these two brothers, they knew that they were against certain death. They're getting ready to depart this world as martyrs, when suddenly a shield appears in front of them and blocks all the Israeli missiles and gunshots, and these two brothers survive in the end. So skeptics do not believe this story, but somehow it is told as if it happened. Could this be a manifestation of the egregore? We don't know, but this is an example of what an egregore could do. This entity starts working for your advantage. But egregores only work when there's a collective, or they work most effectively when they're collective. So what's an algorithm? Created by Al-Khwarizmi in the 12th century or 13th, I think, in Persia. He discovered that many things about life seem to function according to a certain formula, according to a certain pattern. And you can kind of try to calculate this pattern, or you can try to codify it in a sense. Okay, so you can codify a pattern. And once you codify this pattern, it will be more easier for you to predict what this pattern will do or will give. Okay, so once this happened, the code is already built in and then is returned to the person who created it, in a sense. It's very difficult to explain. I'm not a mathematician. I was actually an idiot in math, but I'm trying to explain this philosophically through this thing that we now we all interact with, called the algorithm, where it is a thing that exists as part of the internet in general. But actually, we have come to know of it because of the internet, and specifically new media, okay, and the internet. So it existed way before, but we started knowing it through new media when we saw that if we interact with certain content, this content will be shown back to us more. Okay? It's like the same idea of the egregore. But the egregore is something that is more like it's interacted with real life. This is what makes me think of how synchronicities, to go back to Jung, often happen a lot because of the media. Like when you hear a song that's talking about the same thing you're thinking about, when you turn on the TV and there's like the color that you've been obsessing about. The media adds, today in 2026, the media plays a big part in making many people see, feel synchronicities. Add to that the layer of like spiritual content in the internet that reaffirms certain things that people, I mean, this is my algorithm at the moment. And I've also seemed to convince the algorithm that I'm a lesbian. It gives me lesbian content, which is kind of cool. It's I think through practice, it's showing me really the alchemical applications of this new media, where you can change things through the new media. It doesn't have to do with numbers. It doesn't have to do with how many people follow you, listen to your message, because that's been done forever, right? There is something in shadow media that I'm trying to pinpoint that has to do with the alchemical applications or practice of this new media that we're dealing with. This new media that is changing every day, this new media that a lot of it is owned by a company called Palantir, which is like this evil dark orb from Lord of the Rings. Like, there's a lot of surveillance, there's a lot of people putting a lot of money and power into controlling this algorithmic egregore, just to draw it in black, to know that the Palantir is black. It's like there's eyes everywhere, somehow. And this egregore seems to manifest itself through the algorithm, is what I'm saying. So where comes our part as people who are contributing to this new media space, to this network that we were talking about, to this egregore in a sense? Where is our part in all of this when we can just be people who kind of share knowledge? Or is there something more? Like, is there something practical about this that we can use to our advantage? Allahu A'lam. I think this is all I have to say about this subject. But this last part, the alchemical applications, is what I'm actively trying to discover now after having set a theoretical framework in a sense. So comment, share, give me your thoughts, help me out with this. We're doing it together, inshallah. Yeah, thank you.